Hello, everybody. Welcome to Industry Insider. This is a podcast that provides in-depth, one-on-one discussions about video games, game design, and an intimate perspective of what it's like to work inside the industry. Hosted by me, Dai, a professional game designer, here to conduct casual interviews, hoping to educate and inspire developers of varying skill levels and consumers alike. Today, we have a very special guest. I'm sitting down with Sev D. He's a world narrative designer at Fireslug, a London-based studio working on Ashborn. He has worn another hat such as a systems programmer as well. This makes Sev a powerhouse in the studio when it comes to knowledge, experience, and abilities. We'll be covering a wide array of topics, such as how he got his start, where he draws his inspiration, and ultimately what is necessary in the grand scheme of a game's narrative. We'll dance around a few other topics, such as where we think the future of gaming will go, and how we expect this generation to play out. So thank you so much, Sev. I really appreciate that, and welcome to the show.
Di, thank you so much, man. It's an honor, honestly, to be here. And look, thank you for reaching out to the little guys. Um, we all need voices and whatnot, and I like that you're doing this for the people who got their hands in the day-to-day nitty-gritty stuff of the industry that isn't necessarily talked about all the time.
Well, I think it's immensely valuable because we're the ones that help put the Lego blocks together. We're the ones that are working with the, the picture when it's all muddy and gray and 1 pixel at a time, you know? It's easy to say, like, oh, this is what the grand picture will look like when half of it is assembled or quarter of it is already in sight and we got sketches and blueprints out. But how is it when we talk to somebody who is there from the blue sky phase all the way to the end, right? And of course, since we've both been through these kinds of experiences, we also value that kind of experience, and we value the end product so much more. And to me, I feel like games in general are a lot of people. It's very easy to talk negatively about games, but it's very hard to talk positively about essentially every game, because at the end of the day, this is a hobby, this is a love. I was a gamer before I was a game developer, so I just love games in general. Before I do anything else. So to me, when I talk about games, I just use my background to kind of give a little bit more flair to my reasoning and to my likes, but I just love games in general. So
Yeah, man, I agree with that wholeheartedly. I was a gamer before I got in the industry. And before I, found my calling, I was also just a kid who loved reading his comic books and writing comic stories and, the likes. So, being in an industry where all I've ever fantasized about is being able to tell compelling stories. It's kind of a cheek slapping, pinch me kind of thing. Am I really here? So, yeah.
and that's how I feel, especially since like a decade ago because I like went through my Twitter and I was like, some of the games that I was playing a decade ago were just coming out, and I was like, what, 14, 15? So to me, it was like super exciting and super neat. And now I'm on the other side. And I find myself still so much a fanboy of games and people in the industry and just like E3 and just like everything about the industry in general.
Yeah. It's once you get to the other side, you kind of see just how the cogs work. And you get to see how these things build up to these reveals. And how much work actually goes into it. And then suddenly you realize, oh my God, it isn't just a snap of a finger. And we get these massive, experiences that wow us on the trade shows. But there are people working on the production side months in advance to meet a deadline just so that they could go over this. And then they have to have backup copies of these games, of these builds, to make sure that if there was any kind of bug that breaks the game while they're being played out on a stage, they have another team playing mirrored the exact same thing that they've rehearsed, which is also somehow miraculously, at the same time working with the people on the stage, to, at a moment's notice, to make the magic happen and appear, what's the word, uninterrupted. So yeah, it's cool. It's really cool to see stuff like that come together.
Yeah, and of course we've met. I think I met you through a mutual friend. My friend Gaines, he goes by Strictly on the internet, and Strictly
Yeah.
Gaming reached out to me and was like, "Hey, I feel like you and Sev would get along a whole lot, and I think you should
Shout out to Strictly.
you should hang out." Yeah,
Shout
shout
out
out
to
to Strictly.
Strictly.
And I was like,
Shout
yeah,
out to Strictly.
I would definitely would love to hang out. And so yeah, like I said, I've been a long time admirer of you and your
I
internet
appreciate that, man.
presence and just like like your abilities and skills and knowledge. And I think
Yeah.
I've known you for the better half of this year.
Okay.
And
So
so yeah,
I
it's been
feel I feel I feel very special, but I just want to say that I am quite literally just a bottom feeder. And I'm not necessarily out here for the clout chasing or anything. Um, I've always been a fan of video games, and all I ever wanted to do was to make sure that I spread the gospel of the creative side and the technical side because, um, I understand it. I've worked in it, and I think the more we're able to bridge that gap and relay knowledge, even if it's addressing to the fanboys, um, there is news and knowledge for everybody to learn. And I think if we're all learning, then the game industry becomes less toxic, less poisonous, and a better place for new gamers to come in, and everybody, could be far more kumbaya and more appreciative of the hard work that goes in, not just from our contemporaries, but for, the fans too. So
and I love that. Like that the energy you give off is something that I can only dream to match and muster up myself. So I live vicariously through you and your internet presence.
nah, man, don't even front like that. uh,
It's cool. It's immaculate. I love it. But
oh, I
yeah,
appreciate it.
let's get in straight into the first question. What is some of the earliest games that you remember playing?
So, um, the earliest games that I remember playing, would be Mario and Duck Hunt, from Nintendo.
Hmm.
Uh, um, I could remember I was 6 years old living in Jamaica, Kingston, Jamaica,
Oh,
uncle from when my uncle, who lived next door to my dad, um, brought his Nintendo over, um, and they were playing Duck Hunt, and that was the first time I'd ever seen a video game in my life. And my younger brother and I would be told to go to our rooms because we weren't allowed, so we snuck out, and would just watch through this burgundy curtain. And at one point, my younger brother was always braver than me. So at one point, he came out and he was like, "Uncle, uncle, can we play?" And my dad was just like, "No, go back to your bed. Um, you know, Video games aren't for you right now. You're too young." And then they were just like, "No, man, no, man. Allow the boy, them, allow the boy. Um, let them, let them play." Um, and that was our first experience. And then after my dad saw how we got into it and how we were very much, taking turns, my dad said, "Well, this is an experience for him to grow with his kids." And maybe 3 months later, he we found out that we got, well, my dad always said he wanted to treat his older son, but I knew it was just for being my brother and my dad secretly because he loved his games and whatnot too. So he bought a Nintendo with Xevious from Namco, Legendary Wings from Capcom, and Super Mario Brothers and Duck Hunt. Um, and then uh, it just kind of grew from there.
I mirror that same sentiment and experience because when I first immigrated to America from Vietnam, my father basically was like, "Well, you're gonna stay inside and hang out with your brother because obviously we don't know the culture, we don't know the world, we don't even speak the language." So he went to the
Right.
flea market and bought a box of NES games and an NES, and he gave us wonderful games like you said, Duck Hunt, Mario, Mega Man 1, 2, and 3,
Oh
Hollow
man.
Man, DuckTales, all of that stuff. And it was, and
Wow.
I think I had Legend of Zelda: Link's Awakening, the gold cartridge, which
Oh wow.
I don't remember having fond memories of because I didn't know how to play it, obviously. But it was one of those things where I was like, oh cool, I got a bunch of these cool games. And then from there I went to Game Boy Advance, PlayStation 1, 2, 360, PlayStation 3, 4, and then of course I own a 5 now.
Oh yeah. So that's your gamer history. Well, it was Nintendo and Super Nintendo, then a Super Game Boy. The very first Nintendo Switch was a Super Game Boy. um, and then from there, it was a Game Boy Color, Game Boy Advance. I did PlayStation, and then it was a Nintendo GameCube, and then it was an Xbox One, PlayStation 2, PS3, PSP, um, a Vita, an Xbox One for a very short time, and then PS4, and then PS5. And I have a Switch Lite right now, and I also have a Series S, which is being criminally underused because
Mm-hmm.
the games I want aren't available yet. So,
Oh, okay. I play most of my Xbox games on my computer. Plug up a controller. So I've been there's only a handful of games, I think, maybe even one, that are like console exclusives. I think that's Crossfire X, which uh,
right, we know about that.
at the moment it does not have my attention.
Right, right.
So, but yeah,
Yeah.
that's thrilling, that's exciting. I have always admired games on in the 360 PlayStation 3 era. Is there an era for you that really noted like fond memories and just extravagant experiences?
So I will say that my gaming origin story, what got me into what made up my mind and allowed me to recognize the industry, the gaming industry, as a canvas where I could impart my own stories, was the PlayStation 3, Xbox 360 era. Um, and that was playing Uncharted, Drake's Fortune.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and after that, I saw my future. It was my coming to God moment. Um, and I didn't just see video games as platformers or anything with rudimentary stories. I saw video games as a medium that could potentially rival uh, the movie industry with how it tells its stories. And seeing Naughty Dog and playing that kind of game and seeing how they took a realistic approach to video games um, and trying to mirror the cinematics and everything. Uh, you know, for me, that was my oh my god, people do this. I could do this, and I was in the military at the time when this was going, and I'd of course had a PlayStation 3 at launch, so I'd already been fans of Insomniac with Spiral and Ratchet and Clank, and I'd already played Motor Storm, and I'd already played Resistance: Fall of Man, and I was just like, "Oh, this is great. This is all good," but they still felt like games and not things that could impart meaningful stories until I played that, and then it was just like, well, how the fuck do I get in?
Yeah, I think
What's my trajectory? How do I start plotting my course to break in this? And you know, that's that led me on my thing. So that was in 2007,
Mhm.
and fast forward to 2020 at the start of lockdown was basically when I finally decided to shoot my shot. And I'd already graduated from college at that point and was living in the UK. And lockdown started, and I was on furlough because I was working at a Marriott in Edinburgh. And um, I assembled my little stuff, put my digital portfolio and everything, and was just say, hey, looking for work, this, that, and the third, all this other stuff. And then suddenly people started, hey, we do this, we do that, we do this, we do that, that. And um, a recruiter from Fireslug approached and was just like, hey, we're working on something. We liked what we saw. Let's chat. And the rest is history.
were you ever hesitant on taking the jump? Because I know when I was in, I don't know, around the same era, like 2007, 2009 era, that Uncharted was to me clunky, and it didn't really grab me quite as well. But Infamous was the one that really set me off.
Okay.
Infamous was like the marring between the comic book aesthetic to the moral dilemmas. At the time, I hadn't really played something that felt compelling, like genuinely,
Okay.
because most of the times, like the choices are like between A and B. They feel very limiting. Those choices are very
Right. They're
sectioned
linear
off. Yeah,
and analog. Yeah.
they're sectioned off, and then once you choose them, they impact maybe one decision down the road, and then that's it. They're cut off, and they
Yeah.
float into the ether, and you never think about them anymore. But here,
Right.
it's like once you start compiling the decisions, you can go back and forth. You can change things. You can go a little evil, and then you go a little good again, and it's like it won't impact your grandstanding. It will impact you morally, but not your grandstanding in the city and the narrative. And I just felt like that was just so. It was so much more than a video game.
Right.
I was like,
Yeah.
wow, I'm actually debating fictional people's lives and other things, and that really kind of put me into this mental. Because at the time, was only playing shooting games. So like teenager me, 10-year-old me, I'm like, shooting games are great. They're the best games on planet Earth. They're
Right.
you go through the same gameplay loop over and over between games, and I think Gears of War was the only one that really kind of changed it, but that
Yeah.
was more like spectacle because it was all bloody and nasty and gross, but it
Yeah.
wasn't. I mean, these guys, I couldn't relate to Dom and these guys. Come on now.
Yeah.
So when we finally got to Infamous, it really dawned upon me. And then when Infamous 2 came out, they had like this level builder, which was like
Oh yeah.
super
Yeah.
sick.
Yeah.
And it just felt a lot more intuitive than Little Big Planets.
Yeah.
And I was
It
able
was
to,
easier. Yeah.
yeah, it was easier.
Definitely easier.
And I was able to kind of manipulate the camera and kind of see like, oh, I have an environment, a surrounding, and that's where I really, really kind of got into my brain that maybe level design. At the time, I didn't know what it was called. But I was like, maybe game
Hmm.
development is something I'd like to do. If it's playing with tools like this and putting things together, and I was, mind you, I was trying to make complex AIs like interact with each other, and I was like, oh, well, if I can do this, like I'm sure I can learn and build upon this, and it'll be obviously more difficult, but I can
Right.
do other things. So for you, Uncharted, for me, it was Infamous 2. And
Okay.
and that was, yeah. And then once Kojima announced that he was retiring, I was like, man, I need to get into the game industry. I need to start making games because if Kojima's not making games after 2015, I'm screwed. So that jump started, like, to me, that was the moment where for you were like, I'm gonna compile this portfolio. I'm on furlough, blah blah blah. I'm like freaking out, like, oh my god, I'm never gonna play a good game ever again. So, or
Oh
like a
man. Oh
super
yeah.
detailed video game ever again. So I was freaking out on that front.
Oh wow. Yeah. No. It's interesting to hear the coming of age stories for people in the game industry and how they each end up where they are now. It's a pretty it's cool what what lights that spark and what inspires them. And quite frankly, I hope that the next generation of game developers or something is happens from somebody playing a game with an impactful story that I've written. And you know, that's where I want to go. And that's the kind of thing I want to see, and that's the kind of thing I want to inspire. So yeah.
Do you think it's ever scary to think about like the stuff that you're making in a video game or the stuff that you're putting in is like wholly impacting somebody like Timmy from Idaho? He wakes up and he
I
plays it every day and he's like, this is the best game on planet Earth.
You know what? I want to believe that because um there are things look where I'll say this, and this is not necessary to just be because to get political or anything, right? But we are minorities in gaming. We're minorities, period. Um, we're underrepresented. We're underrepresented up. Fuck, we're underrepresented in all forms of media. Um, and there are aspects of things that we want to see play out to inspire people like ourselves um, and the broader industry as well. Um, so it is it is a hope that um, we're able to leave a long lasting impression that somebody somewhere who doesn't know who we are but will play this thing and have an epiphany or a moment and say, that impacted me some way. That made me want to pick up a comic book or read something or research this because I felt represented in this. And as a creative um, or somebody that works within such a creative industry, that is the hope for me. And I hope that's the hope for anybody that's a creative that wants to do this. And not just for the people that are heavily represented, because the people that are heavily represented, they do inspire us as well. But um, you know, I'm hoping that that is something that's true. I know it's true for me because I do want to tell. I want to be able to tell stories of queer people. I want to be able to tell stories of the underrepresented, Black people, Asian people, all these multicultural relationships and have them play out and be represented. So it just becomes normal and nobody has to think about, um, oh, it's an Asian character, or oh, it's a Black character, or oh, it's a Spanish character, or whatever, um, or oh, it's a queer character. Those kind of stories, I think, should exist. And until they become normal and nobody blinks an eye and it's not controversial um, to want that, uh, then, you know, I think uh, that is my goal, or at least one of my goals. You know, I want to be able to tell these impactful stories, but I also want to make sure that it hits home for not just the broader industry, but for the little guys um, who don't see themselves often, um, and kind of wish that was the case, you know? So,
Yeah, because often too many times that I even find myself doing this. I was playing Horizon Forbidden West not too long ago, earlier this year,
mhm,
and it was like one of those, there's no real right way to say it, right? So I'm
right.
sitting there playing the game, and then I was like, "Oh, cool, a black person," and I was like, "Really? It's 2022, and we're still surprised. Like, I'm still surprised to see
And it's
Asian
not just,
people."
and it's not just, oh, cool, it's a black person. Oh, it's, oh, cool, it's a black person done so respectfully. And it was like, oh, cool, look at the details of how they're able to represent Asian people. Look at how this Latin person looks and the different hues and the skin and the complexity of it all. Like, my God, we're really here where we're doing this, and we have to stop and say, holy shit, they've put in work to do this. And these characters also end up being stars. They're side characters for sure. You'll forget about some. You'll forget some about. You'll forget about some of them, right? But like that marvel of just seeing the meticulous care and how they represent somebody, and how you see yourself in it, just kind of made you stop and tear up. Um, and it's not to say that other video games haven't done such a great job either, but like the sheer breadth and variety, um, in every skin tone that was there was just crazy to look at. And you start to wonder, you're like, yeah, it's 2022. Why are we only just now starting to get really, really good looking, culturally diverse characters in our video games? Why isn't it, you know?
And not
Why
only
hasn't it been?
not only culturally diverse, but like culturally accurate, right? So it's like
Yeah,
somebody
yeah,
who is from this area wears
yeah,
a certain kind of clothes, or like
yeah,
somebody who lives by the equator, or somebody who lives in Africa, like their lips aren't the same tone as the rest of their skin, or their eyelids are double or
exactly.
single eyelids if they're, specifically Asian, or
Yeah,
like
yeah.
it's just all the little nitty gritty.
Yeah,
Yeah, it's
there was definitely, we had, what was it, Fruitgate, last year. And when Fruitgate came about, it was attention to detail, was the main discussion. And I remember being on on my friend Crystal's podcast discussing this. Shout out to Crystal if you're listening. Um, uh, her podcast kind of gave a deep dive into all the aspects of game design and what does attention to detail mean. And it's such a broad thing, but like in this sense, there was so much attention to the detail and how to accurately represent everybody. Um, and it was that complete elevation of bringing everybody else up to the same standards that they would do for a white main character. Um, you know, and they didn't just spare any punches in this game with, you know, white females and white males, but they went the extra mile to make sure black males, black females, um, Asian males, Asian females, uh, Latin, the whole nine. Everybody got the good work, and they stood out because they were made equal. Because it was the first time, I think, in a long while where characters just looked good and didn't look like, um, a carbon copy, but with darker skin. With a skin fade, with a black skin shader, or, um, So
yeah, like it just when I see attempts like that, I feel like just leave it at home, y'all. Like, thank you though. Appreciate
yeah,
the
yeah,
hollow attempt. I think that's the best way to say it. It's
yeah,
hollow. It's
yeah,
it's empty. It's a gesture. I'm like, it's cool,
yeah,
but you're gonna end up giving them a few lines and then moving on, and I'm like,
exactly.
it
Yeah,
doesn't
yeah,
feel impactful. I can't relate to it, even, and this is not digging on anything that on characters that don't have screen time, because there are plenty of characters that we've seen in video games that do not shine on screen or do not have the screen time, but we are heavily invested in and love dearly.
yeah,
But sometimes when we, as minorities, see these kinds of attempts, it feels empty and hollow, and we just feel like it's if the character
or if
wasn't
you're just
there,
doing the check in the box kind of thing for it,
yeah, like hitting
you
a
know.
quotient, you know what I mean?
Yeah,
It's like,
yeah,
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 we should do this. We should do that, because that's no, it's like, again, like you were saying earlier, it's like there shouldn't be like a moment of surprise. It's like, oh wow, this is a black person's story. Like, no, it should be
yeah,
commonplace. It should just be like, I open the game up and that should be it. Like when I
yeah,
walk outside, I don't proclaim that my neighbor is Asian. Oh my god, I'm so surprised my neighbor's from Jamaica. I don't say
Yeah,
that. It's my
exactly.
neighbor, you know?
Yeah, yeah, yeah. So yeah, precisely. And until we get to that point in all forms of media, or in video games especially, um, I think my goal, and when they say, "Oh, you have a woke or political agenda," I'm just like, well, no, my agenda isn't necessarily woke or political. It's just more of these stories
I mean,
helps
you can
make
argue that your
America,
entire existence
make the world. Yeah, yeah,
is woke and well, quote unquote woke and political, right? Like every
yeah,
day we wake up, it's like that.
yeah, yeah. So so yeah, my goal and my future aspirations is to be able to tell impactful stories that not just impact the broader industry, but the Timmies, the Quans, everybody. Um, you know, so
Yeah. So I want to ask, like, what kind of resources have helped you along the way with that? Is there, I mean, obviously you're still on your mission statement, but is there something that you lean heavily towards? Are there games that you seek inspiration from? Are there kind of
um,
products that you think to yourself, it's like, this is not revolutionary, but this is inspiring. This is stand
so
out.
there are games that have come out that have really lent themselves to being open books and course studies. And every once in a while, there's a game that comes out that does something that makes my head turn with and raises my eyebrow. And I'm just like, well, what made them do that? And I play the game obsessively and I take notes, and then I take it to I took the game and I sat in with professors and theologists and people who understand the nature of writing and character development and all these things, and I have them study and ask them these questions. What is it that makes these things so compelling? And then um, so one of those stories was The Last of Us, um, for me, with how they tastefully introduced different characters of the walks of life, and made it that their skin color wasn't necessarily the story behind them, but also introduced other characters as well. And then within Last of Us Part Two, that was a case study for me in like subverting player expectations and environmental storytelling, and how to build up the characters and how their moods, how the environment would affect their moods and stuff. And um, all the little nuances about what drives those characters and their motifs, and their character actions and how they develop. And there was arguably a very broad cast of people were queer and who were queer in their representation, and the type of stories that they were able to compellingly give. And um, I asked people who it affected most, and when they realized how it was for them, and was it effective, and was it not effective, or how effective was it for them, and they were able to give me some valuable insights. So games like that, that are like hallmark stuff, that would be case studies on how to do those kind of relationships. And I mean, that's a resource in and of itself. And then there are other things. So like um, Black Girls Code.
Hmm.
I've spoken to some people who do that, and who are in that group. And it's always nice to see that there are resources handed out to them with how they are able to get into the gaming industry, or even teach not necessarily people who want to get into the game industry, but teach people who did not know that they could code for a living, and branch out and do things either creative or technical within the broader industry of engineering and programming and stuff like that. And those have been valuable resources for me. And then, of course, Queer People Code and Queer People Game, and just reaching out to people who have found strides from being represented and everything. One thing I'd say is Fireslug is pretty diverse, with everybody that they've hired. Their main team is like 28 or so people, from all over the world, and they're queer, they're trans, they're black, they're white, and they're Indian, they're Muslim, they're everything, and they all have this thing where they're contributing, and it's not just hiring for a quota, but it's to make sure that everybody feels wholly represented, and there's corners and stuff for everybody to come in and host things and sit down and talk about their experiences and how they could bring in more people and inspire and stuff. So like that was one of the biggest draws of why I liked Fireslug and the people that are there. And I'm really good friends with the the head of the team who's working on Ashborn and whatnot. And
Hmm.
you know, so yeah, it's those are those kind of resources that has been helping me inform and helping me with my mission statement. And you know,
And a
so
lot of
yeah.
people don't like to, not admit, but don't like to kind of see how sometimes when you're hiring just specifically for what's it called, quality and like statistics, right? Like if you're
Mhm.
qualified for the job, it's like it's wonderful, but
Right.
diversity hiring is very, very important because a lot of the time underrepresented groups and especially in the game development industry, they don't
Yeah.
get a chance to get to those higher positions. They don't get a chance to prove themselves and build that
They
experience.
To be quite honest, most people don't know that they could do all these things. So it's funny because I went home to Florida to go visit my parents during the midst of when my divorce was fresh, and one of my parents just made a little quip while we were at a party and whatnot, and their neighbor was a young black kid about 16, and they were talking about video games, and my mom just made a mention that, oh, yeah, my son makes video games, and the kid literally stopped and said, "You make video games? How? What what do you do?" And suddenly it became this conversation where I had a shadow, and the kid was asking me all these different questions, and he was just like, "Wait, I could write stories and be a video game designer?" And I was like, "Yeah, we call that storyboarding. We call that narrative writing." Their positions in video game, there are whole teams that are built around storyboards, and making a storyboard also means drawing 2D, very rudimentary 2D action scenes with little captions of key frames that are most important that you want to see. And the kid was just like, "How did I not know this?" And those are the things about the resources that are just not given to everybody, right? Um, that information is it's scarce within the game industry itself, right? It's scarce within the game industry itself, because people know that not many people know that you could become a storyboard artist for media. But like that's if you're telling a story, you need a storyboard. You need your story panels of all the key frames and the key descriptions about these things and key lines of dialogue. And resources like that aren't given out or freely told to people who honestly have a talent for stuff like that. Um, and the kid was just like, "Well, I draw, I'm pretty good. I do my comic panels and everything." And I said, "Well, bring your comic panels and apply. Apply to this place, apply to that place. I could point you in some directions." And they're just like, "Oh, wow." I said, "You're too young to maybe work it there and to get a full-time job like that, but you could do some internships. You're 16, you're about to finish high school and start college. Like this is a easy jumping point for you. So like start creating your portfolio now." And I said, if that was me at 16, I'd be deep within this industry much, much earlier. I'd probably be a creative director at this point, writing my first Last of Us or something. So like, um, it's these opportunities that people don't know about, and the people who do know about it don't necessarily share the steps that could. So the steps that could put these people in. And then that also helps with diversifying your thing because the more people know, the more that knowledge is shared. And you have not just candidates who are underrepresented, but you have candidates who are hungry and easily just as talented as their compatriots and their contemporaries applying for these things. And suddenly you don't have an issue doing diversity hires just because you have to do diversity hires to bring in more talent and diversified stories, but because everybody's there. And that's the problem. These resources aren't readily available and they're not spoken about. So, and there are more instances like this across the industry, um, you know, with things that people could do. They just don't know that they could do it and get paid for it. So,
Yeah, and that's again, that's one of the most important parts about getting these resources out, getting these positions out, getting these hires out. Because again, if we just hire through highest qualifications, there is
yeah,
a list of things that you'll be missing nuance wise when it comes
yeah,
to narratives, when it comes to designs, when it comes to,
yeah,
cultures and creativity, because there's
yeah,
so much that impacts creativity and not
yeah,
just how many years you put into school. I went to school for
yep,
something completely different. I was a completely like analytical math and numbers kind of person. I went to UC Berkeley for theoretical physics. I
right,
never in a million years would I ever be thinking about how I could apply math to making games, making levels, and blocking things out to make sure that enemy placements are in the right place, or these
right,
visual and audio cues are in the proper place, so that the players, if they're standing here or
right,
they're standing this far from the objective, they're still able to get a hint of where to go and where to be. Never in a million
right,
years would I've done that. And the same thing for you. If I knew that information at 16, I probably
yeah,
would have conquered the world by now. I probably would be the
yeah.
next Neil Druckmann, you know?
Yeah, or Kojima, or Kojima.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah, so I just yeah, it's fascinating hearing about your studio and how diverse and just how the talent is. I do wanted to kind of diverge a little bit. I wanted to ask, like, how was your first day at the studio? Was it
we were
nerve-wracking?
remote.
Was
We were
it
remote.
okay?
We were remote. We still are. Um, uh, it was chill, but I was a nervous wreck myself
Mm-hmm.
because I just didn't know what was to be expected and whatnot. And it was literally just, hey, we're doing this, we're doing that. What do you think about this? How would you approach this? And what was that? And uh, it's cool because that still happens to this day with everybody. Their questions aren't necessarily, and it's like I'm good at coding, but I hate it. I am yeah, I'm good at coding, but I hate it. When I first started, one of the things that they hired me for was the fact that I was able to translate the technical to the creative and the creative back to the technical and how it works. Um, I see I see the gameplay in the code, um, and I see the code in the gameplay. Um, and the visual aspects of it come to me. So I'm able to visually direct and whatnot, which is why I've kind of been pushing to go far more into the creative side because I get more interactions and I get more fun out of translating the, translating what it should feel like and what it should look like to the coders and the engineers. So, um, but that kind of dialogue and everything still happens with everybody, and that's just kind of how the studio culture works. Everybody's able to give something and easily translate it because we don't necessarily just want to talk in mumbo jumbo and the technical and the syntax. You know, the coders, the coders know how to talk the syntax, and they also, because they see the creative side and everything, they're able to translate that syntax into visuals or describe the syntax in a visual way versus describing it in a technical way. And that's one of the cool things about this studio and how they work, and how um, even the very technical person like Yash, who's the chief engineer in this thing, when he starts to talk modular and stuff like that, and modular coding and modular programming, um, and malleable, and how structuring things in a malleable way. Um, he's also able to finesse this and just also carry it in a way that makes even the people who are strictly on art and design look and say, "Oh, okay, I get what you're doing. All right, that's cool." So yeah, studio. I was a nervous wreck for like the first 2 days, and then the energy just kind of chilled out for me, and I was just like, "Oh, this is just a big old chat group that's working on a video game and whatnot." And this is video game design in a remote era affected by COVID. Um, and, you know, it's been cool.
Did you find any challenges in remote work?
Yes.
I'm not
Yes.
a remote worker myself. I love that face-to-face interaction. I crave it. I need it.
Well, so because it was my first opportunity to work within the game industry, all my interactions have been with the team has been remote, with the exception of a few meetups where we've had where I've gone to London to meet the team and whatnot and just kind of hang out and all these stuff. And um, the challenge for me was um, putting the uh, being able to be personal with being personal with them in person versus over the internet, because we've been largely remote throughout that time. So it's like all that chemistry and everything that we've built up over the course of time, and once lockdown finally started to release its locks gradually, um, did we start to come out and connect more and meet up and whatnot. And like that difficulty was like saying, "Oh yeah, you're Joel, you're Yash, um, you're all these people, you're Norbit," and being able to replicate that replicate that kind of chemistry in person after you've never really seen each other but heard each other's voice, then you're just like, "Oh yeah, this is this," and whatnot. And it just the adjustment is whatnot. That was the challenge to get over and everything. But like, still a strong team, and there's each department is doing amazing things, and you know, so.
Yeah. Was there a surprise? Like what was the most surprising thing when you first started?
How non-stressful it
Mm-hmm.
was. Um, Obviously, when we still have our deadlines to meet and
Yes.
whatnot, and our, I mean, it's cool. We don't crunch. We haven't crunched.
Mm-hmm.
We've put in hours and whatnot, but we've never crunched. So uh, I do know that it is easy. I do know that it is possible to facilitate an environment where you can still be equally as creative and equally as uh, powerful and equally as technical, um, and not work to stress yourself out and work unnecessary hours to get something done. Um, but uh, it's just been an interesting process in the fact that we haven't crunched once, and the team works hard, but there's this respect of everybody's time, and there's this support system that even if you're working on something and you're not quite sure, um, and they're not quite sure, they all team up and stop what they're doing to help elevate something, to help find a solution. And this has happened in every department: art, writing, um, art narrative. uh, design, engineering, sound, um, all of those departments have literally stopped. We're a very small team, so in a small team, you have your experts in that lead in a certain thing, but they also have the supporting um, talent pool. And if one person can't find it, then suddenly everybody else who has some sort of experience with something puts on that cap and they help find and sort that thing. And I've seen it happen in the arts. I've seen art people get in the coding and just like, hey, maybe if you try this, or this and whatnot, and then suddenly everybody's now elevated, or that one person's work is now elevated and that much better. And that kind of thing is what's practically helped us to not crunch so much because everybody is committed to putting on a new hat and learning something to elevate and get somebody out of a problem. And then that kind of thing empowers us to want to do that for everybody else and help. So we solve problems in it's an organic, but in the most non-organic way you'd think about it. So yeah, that's been the most surprising thing, and how chill this environment it is, and you're able to make mistakes and nobody gets on your case about it or whatnot. So,
That's
and this
that's
is all
like
happening. This is all happening within deadlines and stuff like too. So, you know, um,
that must be
so
so
yeah,
relaxing. Like that must feel like that must take the weight of like the
the
title of like
anxiety.
being a job,
Yeah,
like having a job.
it takes the anxiety off of it definitely does take the anxiety of thinking that you have to carry something you're responsible for yourself.
Hmm.
Obviously everybody has a thing that they're responsible for, but then there's this thing where if you're not sure and you say, hey, I don't get this, then it's okay, well, let's all make sure we get it together. And suddenly engineers are working with art people to get stuff done, and art people are working with design people to get stuff done, and design people are working with the sound people to get stuff done, and the sound people are working back with the coders to get stuff done. And it's just this, and the writers are working with these people, and those people are working with the writers to get stuff done. So there's this really, really cool synergistic, symbiotic kind of thing where if one thing is going, then a few people will merge into this one blob and eat the problem.
Hmm.
you know, it's like I call it. I like to coin it as the Metroid fusion parasite kind of thing.
Hmm.
Um, parasite syndrome that we have working in the thing in that environment. So
Yeah, because I found it often from my experience that um, it was like designers are like some of the worst people to take criticism from, and artists are nigh impossible to get any criticism across to. So it's
they
like.
can It can be because we don't like to kill our babies and we don't like to hear from other people that this is how it is. But like,
Mhm.
it's an interesting and humbling thing. And that comes across basically how the leadership works. Um, Nobody is too good, in this studio anyway, is too good to fail. Nobody is too good to be ignorant. Um, and they were all humbled about it because they all just want to make a good product and they don't feel the need that we need to tear each other down.
Mhm.
Um, and so the criticism is, if the criticism will never come from something um, malplaced, because the person that's actually criticizing, um, they're criticizing when there is a call for help. So we're criticizing our own selves. And suddenly it's like, well, okay, Parasite, you're not that strong, so let's all be symbiotic and merge with you to become a super parasite to eat this thing that's making you feel down. And that's just kind of how the studio works. Um, and it's cool. It's
Yeah,
cool.
that sounds
I don't know how it would work on a large scale
mhm.
system or a large scale studio like Ubisoft or Naughty Dog or whatnot, but I'd like to think that there are some of those practices being done in other studios and people are feeling more empowered and not afraid to ask for help, you know? So,
And I think that as developers, we obviously you said it earlier, we don't want to kill our babies, but it's like a lot of this criticism is not misplaced, but it's hard to see because we've grown with this child, right? Like we've
exactly.
seen it
Yeah.
from the gray blocking phase all the way up to the like, the Einstein light bulb moment. Like, oh, it works, it's working,
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
so we see this in this form where we're like heavily attached to it, whereas
Yeah.
outsiders see it in the form that it currently is, which is the working
Yeah.
form, and
Yeah.
they're able to have a much less biased opinion. They're able to kind of most of the time objectively tell you these are
Yeah.
the things that are good with it, and these are the things that are bad, and these are the things that don't work altogether that need to be scrapped. And I think that
Yeah.
dichotomy between artists, designers, engineers and programmers, even the narrative team, is invaluable, to be honest with you,
Yeah.
because we need all those sets of eyes. And I
Yeah.
think I'm sure that in large companies, at least at Ubisoft, when we open things to company-wide testing, I was able to show off some things that I had been working on for months to somebody who is, 8, 9 years my senior, and he gracefully tore it down, but he was like, "This isn't good, and here's why." And I think that
Hmm.
that's like again invaluable to the game development, like team oriented aspect of it, right? Because there's
Right.
a common myth about video games where it's like, two people and we press a couple buttons, and and
Yep.
and so
Or
yeah.
do we just flip the switch and suddenly it's 60 frames per second, 4K with unlimited ray tracing, you know? People think that that's how it works. Um, so yeah, I get you.
Yeah. So it's like the team dynamic is again, it's basically the backbone, if not the spine of the entire game development industry,
Yeah.
despite how many faces there are in the
Yes.
marketing and the PR and in
Yep.
the auteur syndrome of like somebody like Neil Druckmann or somebody like Hideo Kojima, while we
Yeah.
idolize and throw praise and they live lavishly when it comes to
Because
the
well,
limelight.
they do help steer that massive fucking ship, right?
Yeah.
Because there is a person or persons at the top that has the vision and is steering that massive fucking ship. But it all comes down to the backbone, as you said, the fucking spine, which is the team, which is able to take what that person is steering or giving them and really help bring that vision to coalesce, to coalesce in the way it is. So yeah, I agree, man.
Yeah. Is there a common myth about your specifically the narrative design that I'm sure you've seen on the internet, or you see people sometimes even in the studio themselves will say to you?
A common myth. Well, I don't really see it more so. Oh, so I'll say this. Joel, Joel doesn't like, Joel is not the stickler for story. He finds it
Hmm.
mostly redundant and everything. So it's a consistent, hey, stop telling me I need to cut this out because it's helping filling out the world and making it more immersive because there's world building aspects and the way I describe things in a narrative way also helps the environmental storytelling. And he's like, the storytelling. I'm just like, yes, the Ashborn are set a certain way and they're this way and that way. And these little environmental details tell about and inform the cultural society within the Ashborn. So it has to be like this. And then, but he's just like, oh, yeah, I want the Ashburn to be compelling. I'm just like, well, duh, there it is. So it's the aspect of thinking that narrative does not inform every aspect, that the myth is that narrative, even in the simplistic things of a video game, does not impact the entirety of a game. It doesn't matter if you're telling The Last of Us or you're telling or you're playing a game like Resogun, um, there is environmental storytelling which comes from the narrative because the narrative informs the look. The narrative will inform why something is like this. That and it doesn't necessarily have to be said. You see it, and automatically your brain is able to connect with these things. And so people often say that, well, in a shooting game like PUBG, narrative isn't necessarily a thing. And I'm just like saying, well, sure, the narrative is not overly stated and there's not words that's telling this cohesive story, but there is there is a story being told and played out in these environments, and you could put together what happened or why the world is like this now through some form of history, and you can look at certain things of how they are within the environment and say, oh, maybe this and this and this happened, and then suddenly you'll find anecdotal pieces of maybe um, intel that kind of tell of something and hint or allude to something. So the narrative is an equally strong part of the backbone of any video game. Um, Whether it's overly stated like narrative heavy video games or understated like games that are strictly purely just gameplay focused. The narrative is there. And it is a fight that every narrative and storyteller will tell you. Um, convincing, convincing the people who don't understand that narrative is a integral part um, in everything. Um, so
Hmm.
it's a consistent fight, and that's the myth that we continuously dismiss, that we continuously um, blow away every day in the studio.
Is there a certain amount of skill sets that you need? Because I do know that there are, and people reach out to me and ask me plenty of times, and they've done so to tell me like, hey, can you please get a narrative designer on the show? Which, we have now. Um, they're like, could you please interview them and ask them like, what kind of skill sets do I need? What do I need to get in? Like, what kind of advice? Is there anything
So
that concrete that you know for sure that's like, okay, if you need to, because as a level designer, it's like, okay, you need to study these things. You need to understand the steps it takes to create a level. You need to understand, game engines and 3D modeling so that you're able to block things out properly. Is there something like
right,
that for a narrative designer, or is it um,
yes.
something completely different?
So the narrative design has its own structure of things uh, that you need. Um, there is a program that I used while I was in college for building your own story structure, um, and it helps you create branching narratives and everything like this, and key plot points, and um, that helps you with building the universe of your narrative and connecting it, helping you connect the dots. Um, the other important thing that I would suggest is um, reading upon cultures, vast cultures. Um, Study your history, study your politics. Um, Great stories, great able to pull inspiration from religious, cultural, political, uh, and theological inspiration, texts, books, and stuff. Find something like it's an arduous task, but find something that you think would be interesting for you to exploit a story from. Um, Take uh, a screenplay writing course. Most people don't know that um, when they come into video game writing and writing as a narrative person, um, that screen screenplay writing is also the format that they use in television and movies, um, and video games. Um, and writing in prose is good, but you have to be able to tell and describe a scene with as little amount of text as possible, um, and characters. Uh, and you have to do it in screenplay. And you have to be able to do it effectively. And so, writing in screenplay format, having a course or an understanding, even a basic understanding, will help inform you because then you're able to translate from a novel into into a scene and do it effectively. And it's a practice. Um, and so that was something that I was shocked about. I was just like, oh, I'm just gonna go write a prose on everything.
Hmm.
And the first video game company that I applied for, I tried everything in prose, and they were just like, this is very good prose. Now do this in screenplay. And I was just like, what? And they're like, do this in screenplay. Do this in screenplay. And I was just like, well, I only wrote in screenplay for like a semester or two. Like, I don't really like that. And they're just like, well, guess what? This is how we detail scenes. This is how we look at a storyboard and structure a scene. And this is how we place our key shots. This is how we direct our camera. This is how we set up the scene. This is how our this is how we're able to set environmental storytelling. This is how we're able to do embedded stories. This is how we're able to tell embedded stories within a single shot. So yeah, great prose, great paragraph, interesting dialogue, but I need this. I need to know, where are we? Interior, time of day, rooftop. What time? What time of day? Is the wind blowing? How's the camera panning? And you need to be able to describe your scene and transition. Are we fading to black? Are we cutting? Are we intersectionalizing something? Are we displaying two characters at once, split screen and everything like this? All these things are very important. You can get very, very, what's the word? You could get very, very granular and nitty gritty within, when you're writing in prose.
Hmm.
But that kind of distinct and everything. We're outside, it's raining, thunders, we're outside, it's raining. The character is sitting at a tree overlooking something, and then they talk. And that's basically how you set up a scene. And that's how you get the important stuff from, say, she was outside, she was caught in the rain. The wind was howling. Her eyes were covered in no, her eyes submerged in a deluge of, you know, extra superfluous fluff that doesn't really necessarily need to be there. You could get all of that with just saying it's rain. We're outside. Characters wet, sitting on a tree. Time of so, and that's where it is. And then suddenly the camera fades in or cut to this scene and that's it. And having a screenwriting or a screenplay writing course, and I'd say if you're in college, take 2 to 3 years of it, because you're going to need those kind of things when you go apply. And I'm telling you now, most of the video game studios want a 10-page script or less, and they want you to do it with one of their characters from a video game that's established, and they want a hypothetical story, and they want you to be able to do it in 10 pages or less. If you go over that 10 pages, you don't even get a second interview.
That sounds so nerve-wracking.
It is,
Like,
but it is nerve-wracking. But any, and I say this, any person that wants to be a narrative director, writer, within the industry, they want you to have your pros and everything because they're games that do, um, and ancillary. Those are ancillary benefits to the required ones, right? So games like Destiny are very cinematic with how they tell their stories,
mhm.
but they also have their side content. They have their lore, and the lore when you're good at prose, you could write lore for days, and that's the ancillary benefit. That's where it'll come, and you'll get to do those things. But if you do not have the ability to write in screenplay format, you will not get a second look in the interview phase because they have enough people in the writers team who can write lavish, beautiful, descriptive novels and descriptive stories for lore and whatnot. But those same people who are writing the lore also understand how to be minimalistic, but also very, very descriptive with how they set up a scene and how they set the characters to talk. And that's all it is. If you're able to set up the drama and the mood within 2 lines, you don't need the superfluous fluff of a paragraph of just descriptions about where you're sitting, you know? And that's the important takeaway that I've learned from all my interview processes and the places that I'm trying to, apply to. So, yeah.
Well, let's.
So yeah, resources for those people who are listening but want to get in.
So let's dive back a little back into your past here. All I wanted to say about that was that screenplay, and mind you, until you brought it up, I didn't really necessarily understood how it impacted me, because the screenplay writing format is just immensely beneficial to me as a level designer, because I don't care about anything else, right? If me and an environmental artist are working together, and we speak to you, and if you tell me that it's thundering and booming and it's 12:03, like I don't need to know that. Is it raining? Is it not raining? Is it day, evening, midnight? Where are the characters? What is the latest narrative beat that we need to hit?
Exactly.
Is this level something that is supposed to be downtime in the narrative, or is it an upbeat mountainous area in the narrative? Like, is this supposed to have a mini climax? Is this supposed to, you know what I mean? And
right.
For that kind of stuff, as a designer, I will come in and add that extra stuff, and same thing with the environment artist. We'll come in and add that extra stuff down the road, but
yeah,
we need that explain it like I'm 5 kind of writing.
That's literally it. It saves time, and it saves time reading through a script. If you know the scene and it's raining, you know it's dark out or it's dusk, and you'll know if it's either an interior space or you're out in the open. Like, you don't need to get too descriptive. Like, you're in a gymnasium, your interior gymnasium, it's crowded, and that's all you need to know. Exterior, trees are there. It's sunny. Boom. Players right here, or players right there. Those kind of that's like it took a little while to get used to that. It took a little while for me to stop wanting to be overly descriptive, because when the designers and the artists are reading over these things, they're looking at the screenplay and being like, okay, this is it. Okay, this is going on. The storyboarders are like, okay, I could mock up a quick mock scene and do this stuff right here. And they don't need to see how heavy it's raining. They could artistically interpret those things based on the mood of what you're setting and based on how the characters are talking to each other, based on the drama, right? And that kind of creativity, when you start being overly descriptive, you rob them of the ability to infer and create the scene in the way that they also picture it. Because, like I said, video game is a collective, collaborative thing. If you're the art director and you have the narrative designer and you're doing the screenplay, you're constantly chatting with each other, and you're relying on your team to interpret those things. And once they've interpreted it, then you can go back and say, okay, a little bit more here, tone this down here, bring this up here, zone in on this thing here, close in on the shot here, tighten this camera angle here. And that's how the scene, that's how the drama, that's how everything kind of comes into focus. Um, so yeah, that's kind of how it works. That's
Hmm.
how it works. And that was a pretty interesting thing to learn within my interviewing process and stuff like that. So yeah, it is nerve wracking, like you said, but like any good person or aspiring person must, must. You could be good in prose, but you very much need to be able to convey a scene with as little description as possible, um, and be able to influence the imagination that way. Um, that's part of selling yourself and selling your skill and wowing people. And that's how you get your callbacks and whatnot. So
Yeah,
yeah,
like thank you so much for unveiling that process for me, because obviously I'm not a narrative designer, but I work with narrative designers. So seeing that it's equally as impressive a skill set wise to impact my job, it's nice to know that you guys have to overcome your own hurdles to make my job easier. And then of course, my job impacts your job, because there could be something like your example with the gymnasium, right? When you say a crowded gymnasium, I think, I'm thinking, let's say 100 people, and we're wading through the crowd. And you're probably thinking, like,
exactly.
no, let's put the crowd on the sides and then there's an event going on. Or
Yeah,
somebody else may say that, like, no, let's say the gymnasium, there's an outdoor event and everybody's trying to cram through the entranceway in the back. And it's like
yeah,
it's crowded that way. And there's
yeah,
very so much an open space in the back here where the player enters, and we're able to move the camera this way. And then I'll say, as a level designer, like, why don't we do an overhead camera and change our third person to an overhead to kind of really feel like we're wading through the crowd. And it's like
right.
that kind of collaboration is very important. And all of that comes from just as simple as it's a crowded gymnasium.
I'm coming down soon. Yeah, yeah. Keep going, keep going.
And
Yeah, yeah,
that's
yeah.
yeah,
Sorry,
and
a
that's just
friend of mine was just saying hi. So, but
oh,
yeah,
okay.
but but yeah, you're right, man. That's literally the creative process, and how narrative is a backbone of the entire process.
And again, that emulates through the process from people that you don't think would be impacted by, right? So if this is a combat heavy game, let's take the example for The Last of Us, right? If you're writing The
Right.
Last of Us and this is a combat heavy section, and you say, like, well, this is the do or die moment, this character is rising through the ashes, this is the rising action, we're about to reach this pivotal point in the story. I'll be like,
Right.
okay, cool. So we need to add more enemies. We need to add this. We need to add that. And then we pass that down the line. And that narrative structure, like you said, the backbone emulates all the way down to somebody who is a combat director, right? The combat director would be like, well, now that we have 6 enemies on screen, what kind of story you're trying to tell there? And they'll be like, well,
Right.
we want them to be brutal, we want this to be a moment where this character really truly earns their keep, really truly makes it feel like they are part of this world, that they're they've killed their own self, their own, their previous version of themselves, and this is their new
Right.
reborn version. And so it's like,
Exactly.
so now you
They've
got
reached a
the
turning point in their character,
Mhm.
in their character development.
So now you got the narrative impacting somebody all the way down there on the other side of the building who makes animation loops for combat. And
Yep.
that's completely understated. You're correct. It's like completely understated. There's not enough people in both the consumer side and the developer side that understand that the narrative is that's you guys are like the lighthouse in the distance, right? You guys
Yep.
lead us to shore. You guys are the light at the end of the tunnel, and we need that, or you guys are the lines on the road that keep us from veering off course into something that it could be completely detrimental to us.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
But yeah, that's
Agreed.
enough of that. I'm sure that that's we're all just preaching, and me and you are gonna get excited about that. But let's reel it back a little bit. You
Okay.
briefly touched on your career in the military, so I kind of wanted to um, kind of ask you if there's anything that you can indulge us on, story wise or career wise. There, how you ended up going from the military to somewhere else completely and entirely, and maybe hopefully you maybe draw from that experience into your newfound role of a narrative designer or world narrative designer. Yeah.
So, what is it? Man. So I ended up in the military as sort of a last resort,
Mm-hmm.
because when I was in, so I was studying college. I was studying at college because I was still trying to figure out my calling in life. And I drew a lot and I wrote a lot throughout college. And uh, at that time, I was also starting to understand that I was gay. And um, being in college at that point, I just wasn't sure what my career goals were going to be. So I was in school I was in college at a community college in Florida. Um, and I was looking to be a graphics designer because I thought it was cool. I could draw out my characters and then do the graphics for them and whatnot, and maybe put them in like a makeshift comic or something, and sell my comics on the web or something like that. That was just one of the lofty things that I was thinking of doing, and it was creative and whatnot, but I was getting external pressure from my parents to veer into something more practical. I should be a teacher. I should be a doctor. I should be an engineer because I'm decent with math and I know how to understand the programming language. And I just fought back against that. And so we ended up falling out massively. And then my parents decided that they weren't going to pay for my college anymore. What young, rebellious 17, 18-year-old decides that they're going to pay for their own college and whatnot, working at a McDonald's part time and going to college full time? So I said, okay, I can't deal with this anymore. Um, I don't want to deal with this anymore. And college right now is a joke. I don't even know what I want to be. So I'm just going to drop out of college at that point. And I was 21 when my parents made the threat that if I dropped out of college, they would send me back to Jamaica. I was just like, fuck you. I'm not doing that. Love you, mom. Love you, dad. I swear I do. But I just decided, nah, um, let me go join the military and go get some structure in my life and travel and be able to explore my gayness. And that was literally what led me into the military, which is ironic because at the time, the military was very anti-gay and you couldn't explore yourself. However, the freedom came from not being in Florida where my parents had immediate access to me and I could explore myself and explore my creativity and everything else to my heart's desires, um, as much as the military would allow. So I joined the Navy, um, moved out to California, and immediately started to just kind of take it all in. And like I said, uh, it was 2007 when Uncharted came out, and I had a PlayStation 3, and I played that game and had my oh my god moment. I could do this. And then immediately after that, I started looking at studios and who I could possibly go intern for and everything, and tried to intern and spoken to and everything. And fate would lead me to the doorsteps of Insomniac Games because in 2008, um, Tools of Destruction, was it 2008 or 2009? I can't remember if it was Tools of Destruction or A Crack in Time released. And Insomniac had a community day. They used to do these community days all the time during the PlayStation 3 era.
Hmm.
And it was the community day for A Crack in Time. And I went and I started to ask questions. So I'd met Ted Price and I'd met a whole bunch of others. I'd met uh, Gallagher. I don't know if he's still there, but I met the community director, who's very much on, uh, you know, who's on Twitter now and everything. Um, I met all of them and I was asking them, how did they get in the industry? How did they started doing this? And I started asking them, like, look, I want to write stories. What do I have to take? What are the things that I need to do to get back into this? And they're just like, well, you don't necessarily need to go to school, but here are some of the things that we could tell you from so on and so forth and everything like that. And that knowledge that they gave me stuck with me because after I got out of the military, I did a full 7 years. After I got out of the military, I went right back into college, left from California, moved to New York, and went right back into college. Graduated from um, Long Island University, and I hit the books on every talking point that Ted Price and a few of the writers and a few of everybody else gave me, tips that they gave me, and I studied those things. And at the time, I only thought that I could get in as a coder. That was my way in. So I studied like hell coding, even though I hated it. And that was what I led with my feet in. But then once I got in there, I started bullhorning my way out like a true tourist and was just like, hey, I could write. Let me write. Let me write. Let me do this. Let me do this. Let me do this. And eventually that's just kind of how it's where I'm at right now. So my military life basically helped me explore aspects of my creativity and helped land me in a position or in an area where I would be able to meet with my very first game developer. And I was already a big Insomniac fan because I loved Disruptor on PlayStation. I loved Ratchet and Clank on PS2, and I loved Spyro. To this day, my brother and I still would play Spyro the Dragon on the original PlayStation. Spyro 3 is our favorite. So, we know. And making that decision to drop out of college at the time when I was 18, 19, 20, and when I was 20 and joined the military when I was 21, landed me in California. And if I had not gone to California, I would not have met Insomniac, and I probably wouldn't have found a way to take everything that they've told me, in addition to playing Uncharted, and going back to college to finishing and ending up where I am now. So
I have my Insomniac moment was CI Games, Sniper Ghost Warrior 3, I think.
okay, yeah,
2016. I was at TwitchCon and I
wow,
met these guys. There was a booth panel and they had a bunch of games set up and they were like, come beta test our little alpha build, like come hang out, play
oh,
the
wow.
game like 8 months before it came out. I was like, sure. I sat down and waited in line. Actually, I don't think there was a line. It was just, there was a free station. Pulled up to the station and was fiddling around with the menus. I did everything I possibly can. I was like, okay, cool. Like, this is neat. I just wanted to soak in every little bit of this rough-looking product that I possibly could have, right?
Uh-huh.
And what ended up happening was that the senior level designer came over and was like, hey, what's up, buddy? And I was like, how are you? And he was like, are you playing the game any? Because I don't really see you playing the game. You haven't moved. And I was like, yeah,
Uh-huh.
I'm just inspecting the models. I'm making like I want to know how the menus are working. I want to know what sound effects you guys use. I just want to know it all. Like I just want to know every bit because I didn't know at this point what I was going to be specializing in. I just knew
Right.
that I had took like a career gap year because I had like came home from college. I dropped college and my mom was super upset. Gave her a phone
Oh,
call.
yeah.
Was like, I'm leaving my PhD program to make games.
Yeah.
She was not happy.
Yeah. Yeah, yeah,
So,
yeah. They don't get it. They don't get it.
so I,
My parents didn't get it either.
mhm.
You
And
know,
so I was
until
like,
until they get it. So
yeah, it
yeah.
didn't click until way down the road, but she was like, you're gonna be a PhD, like you're gonna be a scientist and a physicist, like you're like that's an esteemed job. And I was like, yeah, but I want to make games. So I came home and took like a little career gap year, did some odd jobs here and at McDonald's, Best Buy, whatever it may be to get by, right?
All
Keep the
right.
roof over my head. And
Been there.
I kept all the money that UC Berkeley gave me back as a refund. I poured into a computer. It wasn't much. Like I bought like a 6700K, and I think the computer ended up in a 970. The computer ended up being like maybe $1,200 or something like that.
Yeah.
And Unreal Engine 4 was at the time a subscription based, and it just
Right.
came out free. So I was like, dude, I was like, all the things are lining up. Life's great. So I spent like quite a bit of time learning Unreal and Blender and taking courses online and doing everything that I could to possibly,
So you were self-taught.
yeah, do everything that I could possibly do. Because again, I didn't know which kind of specialty I was. I was like, I'm just gonna learn how to do everything.
Right?
I don't know
As
color
you should.
theory. I don't really know how to animate that well. I'm like probably the worst programmer ever. So
Really?
I'm like, dang, this sucks. So I ended up going to this TwitchCon, and he was the one that saved my career because I was about to kind of give up a little bit. I was like, oh, I'm never gonna make an indie game. I'm never gonna do anything, and that's when he told me, just take what you have created and just submit it as like part of your portfolio, and just apply to games because or game studios because they're always hiring. Even when they don't have jobs up on the board, they're always hiring. They're always looking for people because people are always leaving. I was like, oh,
Yeah.
okay, cool. And then after that happened, he basically told me, he was like, yeah, I applied to Bethesda and like Blizzard like once a month. Like I don't get anything back, but I'm like, I do it. I was like, okay, cool. So I just started shooting my shot, and yeah, like your Insomniac moment, I ended up at Ubisoft on the Watch Dogs Legion project, and so I'm still pretty fresh. Um, but it's like for me, it was an exciting moment because I felt like the game industry was accommodating me. Like they were like, yes, this is a moment where I felt like I belonged here. I felt like I wanted to be here. So I ended up getting a specialty gig doing level design, and I don't know, I just fell in love with it. I just thought it was awesome.
Wow. Yeah, I like that story, man. You never know where you end up based on just taking the chance. Um, and people think, look, the game industry is very intimidating because you don't know where to start. And I guarantee you, everybody, um, everybody's been there where they learn where they become a jack of all trades because they think that the only avenue is the coding avenue or whatnot, but and they need to have a game made or something, and the truth is you don't. You just need to have something, and you need to shoot your shot at whatever it is, because if you're applying, then somebody will answer. Somebody will always answer. But if you're not applying, 100% of the time, you're not getting anything. So
Hmm.
just do it. Um, and you can't be scared. Um, and that's information everybody should take with them. Um, if at anything, if you want to get in this industry, no matter what it is, pick an aspect and go for it.
And lastly, where would you like to see the future of the game industry go? And tell me a little bit more about your predictions for the rest of the generation.
I want more fucking story games. I don't want live service games. I want story games. But um, that's me. That's me. But I predict that there's going to be some sort of synergy where live service does meet an evolving, breathing, narrative story-based game where uh, things you do in one season will come back and impact a story in maybe 3 or 4 seasons down the road, maybe 2 or 3 years down the road. Um, and it's these kind of interlocking stories that excite me about video games in a way that excites me as a narrative designer. And so while I want the big blockbuster action story games like what I get with my Gears of Wars and my Spider-Mans and my Uncharted's and my Last of Us and God of Wars and so on and so forth, I do see a healthy way to tell those same kind of impactful stories, but also spread over time where they come back with a vengeance with different different things down the road,
Hmm.
and they evolve and leave players coming back and engaged. So I'm looking forward to seeing the industry kind of merge the two, um, because it's an online and it's multiplayer and it's massive, but these interesting story beats can also happen. And I'm seeing that with Destiny, which is why I'm forever um, caught up in that universe because of how they're able to do it. And so that's where I'm at.
Do you think that cloud computing, I made here, just hear me out here, right? Because I don't know if this is something that you're super well versed in, right? But it is coming up on the horizon. So we do have to keep
Yeah.
an eye open on it. And yeah, everybody listening at home, this is soon. I don't know, maybe 5 years from now, maybe 10 years from now, who knows? But I'm predicting the end of this generation. We're gonna definitely see it play a larger role than it does in the beginning here in 2022.
Yeah.
But do you think that cloud computing, giving that the flexibility, scalability, and the stability of that kind of hardware and those kind of benefits that it gives the developers when it comes to removing traditional limitations, memory requirements, high graphical capabilities, storage, that's a huge issue, right? Because eventually games are going to get so large that it'll be cheaper to fly a hard drive across the nation than it is to actually send it over the internet.
Right.
When it comes to that kind of scalability, flexibility, and stability, do you think that cloud computing will definitely help impact these kinds of stories, or at least
I
bridge the gap
think
between the two?
I think I think it will. Um, how and in what markets, and and how saturated it will become will definitely um, be accelerated in markets that are already developed to have that infrastructure, like first world countries and places with very, very strong internet. The hurdles to getting that um, accelerated is the greed that comes from the internet service providers with data and data hoarding and commanding those spectrums. Um, and it is going to become very, very, very difficult a hurdle, not difficult a hurdle to get over. Um, but that's not something that is my concern, so to speak,
Hmm.
because games are going to continue to evolve, and I honestly think that that's the avenue that they're going to move forward to as we move forward, because things are working in remote. There's more stuff. There's more that you could get from the cloud and everything. Um, the infrastructure isn't matured yet to do that, but it's accelerating there, and it's gonna start to accelerate itself within the next few years. Um, they're already doing stuff and they're already making these investments in it, but that isn't something that I expect to be prominent within the next five. I think if I'm being the realist here, we'll start to see most of those things start to play out in the next 8 to 10 years.
Hmm.
Um, and that's kind of where I think the future is going to be for all these things. And um, the physical media people are going to hate it. But that's just one of the aspects that's one of the hurdles that they're going to need to be able to preserve um, the legacy and still respect the legacy while effectively transitioning into this digital future.
Hmm.
Um, and there's going to be ways to do that respectfully, but we don't know how yet.
Yeah.
And I'm not that smart to figure that out.
Yeah,
So,
we're still in an area of paving the way, but also laying the road work. So it's
yeah,
very, very hard to kind of say because there is no template. This is very so
yeah,
much the early 2000s in shooter genres, right? Like we
right,
haven't mapped aiming and shooting to L2 and R2 or left trigger, right trigger yet. So games are shooting with the square button and the R1 and all these extra stuff. It's like we're until there's industry giants that comes along that not only is able to pave the way fast enough, but also create the way fast enough. I don't think I think that realistically, yeah, you are right. Like 8 to 10 years sounds like a fair time because Ubisoft's scalar technology, cloud computing situation is only getting up in the air here this year. And
Mhm.
we won't see an impact on their stories or their games, or if anything, in the next 5 or so years. So
Yeah,
I'm hoping that maybe Microsoft Azure or Sony is able to leverage this kind of cloud computing to kind of benefit their games as a service in the vein of something like that you love so heavily. Um,
yeah,
Destiny, if there is able to be another Destiny, or even if another narrative experience that connects the infrastructure of the previous road to the newest ones, it's like we're able to
yeah,
have this situation where uh, you will continually play an evolving story that comes back and back and back. And it's not so much how we previously had it, where World of Warcraft, where it's just drop a new expansion and then that's it. We
yeah,
move forward and forward and forward. Where now it becomes a narrative where it's overarching and you're living through it in real time, but also able
yeah,
to go back and experience it in real time and get caught up, much
yeah.
like a TV show,
Right. Yeah, yeah. I think that's the future. How we get there and how we respect the legacy of those things is going to be the trickier question,
Hmm.
and the trickier problem to fix. Um,
But
but
yeah,
luckily my focus though is 100% squarely focused on, you know, telling that story that's going to impact um, a a kid or make a young child or a young adult have an epiphany that they want to tell stories,
mhm.
and they'll tell meaningful stories that impact somebody else, um, and normalizing uh, everybody um, to great stories all around. And when
Mhm.
I say everybody, I don't just mean every white person, but I mean
Everyone on
everyone
Earth,
there, everyone on
everyone,
earth,
yeah, everyone on Earth.
everyone. Yeah.
So I guess we are closing here, and it's been quite a wonderful time for me in just listening to your stories and picking your brain a little bit. I just have two closing questions for you. One,
Of course.
what's one piece of advice you can share with the listeners? I know you dropped a bombshell of knowledge on us earlier in this episode, but if you can just magic up something really, really quickly for us. Is there something that's drives you, and when it comes to advice, to share with the listeners?
Ask all the fucking questions. Ask all the questions in the world, um, because um, ask it from the professionals who you look up to. Um, they, people in the gaming industry, do not hoard information. They love to impart that knowledge. The problem is they get way too busy in their professional field that they never freely impart that knowledge because they don't have the time. But if you are inquisitive and you're curious and you want to know how something works, ask and they will tell you freely. They will actually stop and make the time at that point to answer and to enlighten you because this is a very it's a very collaborative um, it is a very collaborative industry, and um, everybody in this industry knows the barriers to entry, and they want a way to lower that barrier of entry so that any and everyone can get in, whoever wants to get in. And so they're working on ways on doing that, but they also understand that it's not happening fast enough. So ask. Ask all the questions in the world. Whatever you're curious about, ask an expert, ask a subject matter, ask somebody with knowledge of the subject matter. And if they don't know, one of their contemporaries will know. And because it's such a collaborative industry, um, they will all chime in and it become this massive thread where suddenly they're talking and you're being overwhelmed with too much information. So do not be afraid. Ask. And what was your second question?
And my second question is, where can listeners learn more about you?
Twitter. I'm on Twitter. At DZDevs. Talk to me. I love chit chatting about video games. I love chit chatting about writing. I love chit chatting about everything. Very, very, very much a joker with certain things, but I could buckle down and get serious about anything or any topic. So like, don't ever be afraid to ask. That's basically how I ended up on the show because Die here shot his shot, asked the question in the middle of the dark, and I'm here now talking to you guys. So yeah.
So again, thank you so much for joining me on the show. If you have any questions for me, feel free to air them out now. But it's been, again, a wonderful time with you to speak formally with you for the first time. We've
I appreciate that, man.
obviously
I
spoken over
do
the
have a
internet.
question.
Yeah, go ahead.
I do have a question for you. How do you get how do you have such rapid clapbacks for all these people who want to drag you? Because I see this all the time. And you fire back with these really, really witty comebacks, man. I'm never that fast. I'm fast.
I try to, what I do is I tell myself, please, no cursing, no insults. I need something that when I dig, I want to dig in deep. I want to dig in to the point that, like a mic drop moment, right? Because a lot of people, obviously working for Ubisoft, it's not new information to be like the world's most hated company. So to me, I'm used to it. I have thick skin. It is what it is. But when people say rude things to me, I obviously I've said this before. I don't pride myself in being a game developer before a gamer. I also find myself to be just a normal person, just who happens to work at big companies.
Same.
But when I'm put in a position where unnecessary negativity comes my way, I do feel a strong urge to put somebody in their place when respectfully, I guess, is the right word. Or in a place where I feel like I'm able to, if a coworker or somebody is admiring my work, or a company is inquisiting my work, I'm like, I didn't say anything rude. I didn't do anything wrong.
Right.
So yeah, I think that's where it comes from, is really putting those parameters on myself, so that I'm able to, I have to think, I have to come up with something quick, or I have to come up with something witty, because, insults are very easy to just hurl and leave that way, but coming up with something that really digs is, you know, it's almost an impossible task in a quick form like that.
Well then, um, honestly, bro, it's been a pleasure um, interacting with you on Twitter, but also having this formal conversation and insight into each of our lives. I've actually learned plenty of things about you that I never knew, and it's also been profound and inspiring on my end. So, thank you. Um, and thank you for helping giving me a platform to sit down and talk to some people as well. Like I said, like everybody in the industry, uh, we want to bring um, the access or the ability to access everything um, down to the lowest level of access that we can, and um, this is a very effective way to go about it.
Hmm.
So thank you.
Yeah, no problem. Thank you for your kind words and speaking highly of me. Thank you, everybody, for listening at home, at work, wherever you may be on the drive home. This has been Industry Insider. This has been our very esteemed guest, Sev D. Again, world narrative designer at Fireslug, working on Ashborn. And just overall stand-up person. You can find him on Twitter. I have that linked in the description of both the video, if you're watching on the video form, or if you're listening on a podcast, I have that information in the description. So thank you so much for tuning into Industry Insider. Please, everybody, have a great time.